We finally have a car for the Buick fans on Muscle Car of the Week. I hope you're buckled up and strapped in because we're about to light stage one. This week's Muscle Car of the Week is one of my all-time favorites. In fact, I've been waiting for the Brothers Collection to acquire one of these cars so that I could get a chance to spend some time with it, because it's not something you see every day. It's a 1970 Buick GSX with the Stage 1 option in Saturn Yellow with a 4-speed M22 transmission. It is just about everything you could want in this kind of car if you like these things, and it just gets me stoked being around it. There's a lot of elements that make up the GSX story. I mean, Buick wasn't really known as a company that made a lot of high-performance cars. Sure, back in the 50s, they had the Super Rivieras that were pretty fast. They also had the Grand Sports that came out in '65 and had a nailhead, 401 or 425 V8 motor. The Riviera Grand Sports had dual quads in '66. But by 1970, the world was going muscle car crazy, so everybody wanted a cool muscle car. And of course, Chevrolet had the Chevelles Super Sport options. Pontiac, of course, had the GTOs. Oldsmobile with the 442s, and the Chrysler products and the Ford products. Everybody had a wild-looking muscle car, except Buick. The Buick Grand Sports, which were good performers, were all made in more or less subtle colors. They didn't have stripes on them. They were kind of sedate. But they're primarily known to be a luxury car. So if they were going to attract a buyer that wanted a fast car, it still had to be comfortable. And that's the cool thing about the Grand Sport, the GS, the GSX. All these cars have a lot of sound deadening. They got nice carpet. They got comfortable seats. They were super tight and quiet to drive, which was nice. You could drive them every day. But if an unassuming, muscle car Corvette pulled up next to you at the stoplight and you wanted to flex your muscles, this car would still get the job done. But everybody at GM knew that these muscle cars, they might not have been the biggest seller, but they got people into the showroom. So that's kind of where the GSX theme came from. They wanted to make a car that caught your eye when you drove past your local Buick dealer with a bright color and a wild stripe package to get you in to look at the rest of the cars. Maybe you saw the GSX from the street, but you came in and bought an estate wagon or something else. So it was largely a sales tool, but the good thing is that it also was a screaming performer. Unlike a lot of the other muscle cars, Buick wasn't really in racing before this came out. So this wasn't really a NASCAR version or a drag race version that Buick made for the street. And in fact, the nomenclature they used, they've had the Grand Sport name for quite a while, but the GSX, the X, basically stood for experimental. And anything in 1970 that had to do with flight or experimental or the space program was very, very popular. So that's where that X came from. And also, this one's got an engine option called the Stage 1 option, and Stage 1 referred to the stage of a rocket ship that got you off the ground. So they're playing on popular culture terms at the time to kind of beef up the image of this car. But if you look at this thing, it has all the right elements in place to run neck and neck visually with a GTO Judge or an Olds 442 or a Hemi Cuda. When you look at this thing, they came in two colors: Saturn Yellow and Apollo White. The hood was blacked out, satin black, with a red pinstripe around the perimeter. These things had a body-long stripe that started in the back at the rear wing and kind of dipped down on the quarter and then launched forward up the car and came to a point in the front. That stripe went up over the rear wing, and the fact that the car had a rear wing was, very unusual for a Buick. And that wing is on pedestals, and the sides kind of come down, and it's been affectionately known as the salami slicer style wing. There was another wing in the front. There was a chin spoiler down below, and that was done in satin black. The car had a hood tack on it, another thing you didn't see on a Buick. Of course, the chrome rally wheels, the Buick called them road wheels, raised white letter tires, and a blacked out bucket seat interior But it still retained a bunch of creature comforts because it still was a Buick after all. So you could get air conditioning and power steering and brakes and power windows and all that kind of stuff. The GSX shares its hood with the regular Buick Grand Sport, or GS, by 1970. It's got a pair of functional scoops, but they're placed right in the middle of the hood, so they're not really the best for high performance, but they do allow fresh air to come in through those scoops. It's not like a Ram Air that's got the scoop in the front that air gets easily pushed into. This also has an 8,000 RPM hood tack, which all the GSXs had. But this one is kind of extra special because it also has the Stage 1 option, which is the regular GS 455 engine that's been upgraded with Stage 1 heads and a Stage 1 cam and carburetor tuning to match. And the heads have a larger valve size than a regular GS 455. This makes it 360 horsepower, 510 foot-pounds of torque. That's more torque than any other GM mid-size sedan. The only car that GM made that made more torque than that were the full-size Cadillacs with their 472s, but those cars were so big they weren't really high-performance cars. They needed that much torque just to get going. The only labels of a Stage 1 car on a GSX is the sticker on the air cleaner. A regular GS could get a Stage 1, but it would have a thing in the grille here that says Stage 1, and it would also have badges on the fender. The GSX package has nothing on the outside, so you don't know if it's a stage car until you open the hood. Of the 678 total produced GSXs, there was only 120 of them that came with the Stage 1 engine option and the 4-speed. So this makes for a pretty rare bird. The Stage 1 engine in this case is coupled to a Muncie M22 Rock Crusher 4-speed transmission, and in back is a 10-bolt rear end with a 3.64 to 1 rear gear ratio. You could get a 342 in the air conditioning cars, but the standard non-AC cars had a 364 rear gear. Interestingly, they did not have a 12-bolt rear end, even though they made more torque than like an LS6 Chevelle. They only had the Buick pattern 10-bolt. But they survived. The tires were the fuse. You know, these things made a lot of tire smoke. If you got them to hook up, they went pretty fast. In fact, Motor Trend in 1970 clocked a GSX Stage 1 car running the quarter mile at 13.38 seconds at 105.5 miles an hour. And they called it the quickest car of 1970. That was actually faster than they clocked the Hemi Cuda with a 426, Chrysler V8 in it. That car ran 1370s. So to this day, there's an argument if the Buick GSX is in fact faster than a Hemi Cuda. I don't know, maybe they had the world's most perfect day and conditions and traction, but that's printed and it's been standing the test of time. There's a few other interesting notes about that 455 Buick engine. It was big. It was physically one of the biggest engines that GM ever put in a car, but it was also fairly lightweight. I think it weighed almost 150 pounds lighter than a Chevrolet 454. And part of the reason is it was a thin wall casting design, which is pretty modern for 1970 for a big V8. The downside is that they were all 2-bolt main bearing caps, and some of these blocks were prone to cracking. So a lot of people that raced them or beat on them real hard would end up cracking the block in the lifter valleys and, making junk out of them. But the design was very interesting and it pulled some weight off the front of the car. Not that the GSX was a very lightweight car to start with. It was still pretty big, and a lot of them had a lot of plush options inside, and they weren't cheap either. I think the base price was around $4,400 for these things. So it was at the upper echelon of muscle car pricing, which contributed to their fairly low sales. I mean, 678 is not a lot of cars. But I think the mission was to get people in the door and not necessarily to sell 1 million of these things. So if you see one today, take a few minutes to check it out because it's a rare car and it's super cool. I love the look of them. They're different, they're obnoxious, they're loud, and they're great fun to drive. People always ask me if I could pick one car for myself out of the brothers collection, what would it be? You're looking at it. This is the car that I had posters of on my wall in high school. Always love these cars. And you can see more of it on our website at musclecaroftheweek.com. We'll have an array of photographs to check out. We've got our Facebook page. You can like that page and share this car with your friends, and also the YouTube channel. If you subscribe there, you'll never miss an episode of Muscle Car of the Week, so you won't miss next week's car. Check it out.